What we want to talk to him about is his work in psilocybin mushrooms and DMT, and his trip with his brother Terrence into La Chorrera down in the Amazon, where they studied these things firsthand and the experiences that came forthwith from that.
My God. Well, let's stop talking about it and start talking about it with him.
Yeah, he's right there.
Oh. Hey, Dennis. Jeff, you got this whole podcasting thing down. Tell him why he's here.
Okay. Dr. McKenna, as far as why you're here, is because I essentially tracked you down.
Why am I here?
Why are you here? That's the big question. I essentially tracked down a lot of work you've done and a lot of work that your brother Terrence did with regard to DMT and the psilocybin mushroom,
Right.
and your adventures at La Chorrera, and I think it's probably going to be a given that we're going to want to have you back multiple times.
Yeah, it's not a given that you don't want to come
goes.
Right.
That's how much I
That you want to, yeah,
my
exactly.
reputation is trashed. What's left of it?
Right. But I think just kind of to lay a groundwork for people who aren't familiar with what DMT is and what the psilocybin mushroom is and what it does, can you kind of give us a brief overview of like, first of all, what is DMT and what does it tend to produce in people?
Sure. I understand neither of you have had direct experience with either one of these compounds. Is that true?
No, sir. Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. Okay, but you're UFO investigators. Or paranormal phenomena investigators.
An experiencer. So yeah, that'd be more
more of an experiencer than an investigator.
Right.
Okay, but obviously your experience has been enough of an impact that you're preoccupied with this whole thing, right? In some ways.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, okay. Both those things, DMT and psilocybin, are probably things that you should try and put on your data point, your data sphere at some point, if you can do it, because I do think it has a lot of bearing on this whole question. And just to briefly explain what they are, they're both hallucinogens, or psychedelics is maybe a better term. And so they're, in the same class that LSD and mescaline and these kinds of things are in. But they're in the same chemical class. They're very closely related to each other chemically. DMT is short for dimethyltryptamine, and psilocybin is named after the mushrooms that it was isolated from. But it is also a tryptamine. It's chemically it's called 4-hydroxy, or 4-phosphoryl dimethyltryptamine, but it's converted to its active form in the body, which is called psilocin, is the usual name, but the chemical name is 4-hydroxy dimethyltryptamine. So they're very, very close chemically to each other, and they're also very close to serotonin, which is also a tryptamine and an important neurotransmitter in the brain. It's chemically 5-hydroxytryptamine, so it's not a dimethyltryptamine. And I don't know if this chemical stuff, makes sense to you or even really is important, except to point out that this is a family of chemicals. And the chemicals are closely related to serotonin, which is a very important neurotransmitter in the brain that has a lot to do with that mediates a lot of what we experience as consciousness or conscious experience. We know that serotonin, has got its fingers in many pies, everything from the way we eat, to the way we sleep, to mood, to sexual response, to obviously perception, and the hallucinogens, the true psychedelics, as I like to call them, which includes psilocybin and DMT and these other things, all target a certain family of serotonin receptors. There are many different subfamilies of serotonin receptors because it does do so many things. But all the psychedelics, as far as we know, all target a particular subfamily, you might call it, of these serotonin receptors. So there's a commonality of action there, and they all elicit kind of similar experiences.
Okay.
But the tryptamines, DMT, psilocybin, and there are others in the family, of the psychedelics, 5-methoxy, DMT, and bufotenine, all are kind of in a similar family, and they have a unique pharmacology and a unique phenomenology. They are, how to put it? I guess, and they have superficial resemblances to the kind of effects that something like LSD has, but an experienced tripper would never mistake psilocybin or DMT for LSD. They are unique, sort of, and they sort of elicit this realm of experience which I sometimes call the tryptamine dimension. I mean, it is qualitatively, it's got certain qualities that these others just don't have.
In a blind dose, an experienced person would definitely know what it was. Out of say the three, LSD, psilocybin, or DMT, it would be a discernible difference to know.
There would be a discernible difference, yeah, especially with DMT, because DMT, depending on how it's taken, is if it's taken orally, if it's taken orally, nothing happens because it is not orally active. It's destroyed by an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase, and but in traditional South American shamanism, there is a hallucinogenic brew called ayahuasca, which means vine of the souls or vine of the dead, and it's actually always made from at least two plants, one of which contains DMT, and the other contains these monoamine oxidase inhibitors. And in that form, it's orally active. And if you don't take it with an MAO inhibitor, if you take it orally, DMT is not orally active. Now, psilocin is orally active without an MAO inhibitor. It's just molecularly different enough that it is not degraded by MAO. And so without any preparation, the mushrooms are orally active. All you have to do is, stoop over and eat them.
Yeah,
Pick them and eat them. It doesn't require this elaborate preparation that ayahuasca does.
How did they discover to merge those two plants, given all the plant life that's in South America?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
That is a profound question. And nobody really knows the answer. A lot of ethnobotanists and people like that have been asking that question for a long time. Out of all the 80,000 species in the Amazon, how did they figure out, how if you combine these two, which are not particularly, plants that you'd want to consume. I mean, it's the bark of one and the leaf of another, so it's not exactly... they're not succulent looking or anything. How do they figure this out? Well, interestingly, if you talk to the shamans, how did they figure this out? If you ask them, they will invariably say, well, the plants told us. the plants taught us to do this. The plants gave us this knowledge, And like a Western, reductionist, rationalist person, your immediate response is to say, well, that's just poppycock, that's just ridiculous, So then you start asking for other explanations or thinking, well, was it trial and error? Was it,
right.
watching animals? How do they figure it out? But they will always say that, the plants taught us to do this, to make ayahuasca, which is very strange. Although, in the context of shamanism, it isn't strange at all, because in the context of traditional, use of these things, the plants are understood to be spirits. The plants are understood to be, entities that are intelligent, that communicate with people, that are, as smart as we are, and in fact smarter than we are. And, again, this is anthropomorphization of the thing, of attributing these human properties to, to the plants. But I'm a 21st century, scientifically educated, Western, pretty logical reductionist kind of guy. And, in my own personal experiences, you get into that state, and it's very easy to believe that you're in communication with another intelligence, because a lot of what seems to be going on, it's like, I didn't come up with this stuff.
Right.
On the logical level, I can well, obviously I had to have come up with this. This is clearly some part of my brain, that is split off and is presenting itself to me as another entity, another personality. That's the reductionist explanation. But in the face of the experience, that explanation seems a little bit shallow, because it doesn't seem that way at all. It does, in fact, seem like, with both the mushrooms and ayahuasca, they present themselves as, you have a conversation with them, and and it's not a conversation like we're having now, but it's a series of sort of, I don't know how to describe it, understandings, revelations. It's like, sitting down and talking, except you're not talking, but you're, meditating, communing is, I guess, a word. That's a word the alien enthusiasts like, right?
Right, okay.
Sitting down, you're communing with this other entity, and you're exchanging information. And it's very much like that. And, it's very much like that.
If it's, I know what you described it to me the other night when I'm at a distinct advantage because we had a nice conversation the other night. You were explaining it as more or less like a voice. And I know that when you had said that, I was curious, in your experiences, has that imparted anything to you in that way?
Yeah, well, sometimes it is a voice. It actually appears to be a voice, but more often it's more like a gestalt of understanding. It's like, I imagine, telepathy would be, actually. Mm-hmm. If you could communicate with somebody, maybe a loved one or somebody that you're very close with, if you could sit down and without saying anything, if you could, to borrow another phrase from science fiction, if you could grok what they were saying. Right. It is, from Heinlein, it's like grokking something. It's a very gestalt type of thing, but there's definite information that is imparted, And another thing I should say, most people, even most people who take psychedelics and take these substances on a fairly regular basis, never really experience this, or they rarely experience it because they don't structure the circumstances. They don't organize what Leary called the set and setting properly in order to have this come to their attention. Most people take mushrooms and they're fun and it's a party, and and they never actually most people, even people who take mushrooms, never take high doses. They take medium doses, and it's a recreational thing. They don't take big doses, and they don't do it in a place where the purpose of the exercise is to pay attention to what the mushroom is telling them, not to see glitters and do all this superficial stuff. The purpose is to sit down and pay attention with what it has to teach you. And most people don't do that, which is one reason why it's, in some ways it's good to experience this in a traditional shamanic context, because in a shamanic context in South America or Mexico with the mushrooms or whatever, that's the purpose of doing it. It is not recreation. It is a serious, not a party drug at all. It's a serious thing, and you're there to learn things. And if you take it under those circumstances, I mean, my brother recommended, and I do too, with the mushrooms especially, and ayahuasca as well, it's the thing, the best circumstance to take it in is in total darkness, or as dark as you can get it practically, and to take, in the case of mushrooms, 5 dried grams of Stropharia cubensis is a good place to start, or Psilocybe cubensis is a good place to start. And, taking that amount in a quiet setting in the dark, well, if you do that, you don't really have to work very hard. I mean, like I tell people, if you do that, you'll be utterly convinced that they've landed. I mean, it comes on, it presents itself, in this very strange way of, being alien or certainly being non-human. It doesn't necessarily, say, okay, I'm extraterrestrial or something like that. It doesn't really present itself that way. It just presents itself as an intelligence, an entity that is, absolutely not human, but that you can communicate with, you can understand, and that knows things that you don't know, and has things to tell you. One of the tricky parts, that again, we used to play this game. It was like with the mushrooms. It was like, okay, so you know so much, and you present yourself as knowing, so much. So tell me something I cannot possibly know. Right? That will satisfy me that you're real, and it's not just part of my brain talking to another part of my brain. How can you actually present me with information that I cannot possibly have known? And you'd be surprised, how tricky that is, because it will. I mean, it will present you with, it will present you with information like that. Like, okay, here's a star system, 4.3 light years from Earth. This is a blue giant with a, and like, oh, wow, well, that's okay. That's pretty cool. Prove it. How do I know? Or it will often show things, in these visionary states. It will show things like 3-dimensional hallucinations with your eyes closed, and you can't tell whether they're machines or they look like machines, but they could be buildings, because there's no sense of scale, right? Or they could be organisms, or they could be, they could be microscopic, they could be subcellular structures. You have no damned idea, what it is, but you do know, I mean, you can see for yourself that they're usually incredibly beautiful, incredibly intricate, and you'd be hard-pressed to think of them on your own. I mean, normally, if I'm just daydreaming or something, well, I mean, I can sometimes come up with these, but I have a lot of experience under my belt. But I think that people are not familiar with the state would be hard-pressed to come up with these types of, visions spontaneously. I mean, they do definitely have this otherworldly sort of thing, and so that's kind of the phenomenon.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
When you're in that state, do you have your five senses? Are you seeing through first person? Are you aware of that you're still in your clothing even? All of that? Is all of that normal?
Absolutely. Usually, yes. I mean, occasionally you get so out there that those boundaries begin to break down. But in my experience, even in high doses, you're still you, your ego or your selfhood. Your ego may be a little bit set back, but your selfhood is pretty much intact. I mean, if, you can be in one of these visionary states and, somebody knocks on the door, and it's the neighbor next door or something. I mean, you can totally come back to your body instantly, deal with the whole thing. They have no idea there's anything going on, and then you can go back and go right back into it. So it doesn't really involve loss of control, I mean, some things more than others. And again, it's a question of dose. But generally, you're pretty intact. Now, I mean, having said that, I mean, the first few times, because it's such an unfamiliar state, that may not be so easy. I mean, that's part of what shamanism is. That, I mean, not that I'm a shaman, but after you get some experience under your belt, you sort of know how to deal with these things. The first few times that you do it, there's nothing threatening about it. In fact, it's quite pleasant usually. But the first few times, you want to you want to take extra steps to make sure that you're not disturbed, that you don't have to deal with anything in the real world if you can possibly avoid it. And it's not that you can't, but why? Avoid it if you can, because that does kind of disrupt the whole thing.
Well, the thing that we had this week was we had a young lady on that related an experience from her childhood in which she talked about essentially small, this is the thing I had emailed you about earlier, small, furry, what she kind of described as wolf-like beings around the edge of her bed when she were a child, and she said they would talk to her, and during the interview I asked her, I said, well, what would they say? And I'm in the back of my head thinking exactly what I'm going to hear, and she said, well, it was just kind of gibberish. and I said, well, what were they like? Were they friendly? She said, well, yeah, they were friendly, but there was something like you had to keep your eye on them, and you had to you wouldn't want to turn your back on this kind of thing. And I'm like, I started laughing just to myself, and I put my head in my hands, and I said, I don't know how much more connective this can possibly get, because this is exactly what I've heard people talk about when they talk about the DMT experience, which is seeing these beings that appear as some sort of self-transforming machines, but you're not sure exactly what they're made out of. And these are the people that I've so often read about that sing things into existence to show them to you at a pretty, what I understand is a pretty manic pace.
Very manic, yes, compared to what we're used to. I mean, they're the class. Well, now you're talking more like DMT, because DMT is, psilocybin is good because its clock speed, or whatever you want to call it, the pace of the thing is much more in sync with our regular, clock speed. I mean, if we're going, 1.5 megahertz or whatever, psilocybin is not that far out of phase. But DMT is like accelerated, and I often say, in fact, DMT is kind of like the speeded up tape version of psilocybin, where you do have this feeling of acceleration. I mean, you actually have a feeling of moving at sub-relativistic velocities, and it's all unwinding. It's so fast that you can barely process it. In fact, you can't process it. It's quite overwhelming in that sense. So, all this stuff is unfolding and you're seeing, and it's quite manic. It's like seeing a cartoon, and it is very cartoon-like, being shown, at fast forward on a projection screen or a videotape. It's like that, so that you feel like there's a lot of phenomena that's being compressed into this 10 minutes. And, at the end of the 10 minutes, you feel like, okay, a lot happened, and I don't really know what the hell happened,
right.
So it's hard to process it, You don't come away with much, in a sense, except an overwhelming feeling that you've just seen something incredible. It's very ecstatic. I mean, you feel happy. You feel exalted. You feel, more than anything, you feel astonished. I mean, it's like you witnessed a miracle or something.
Is it the same every time
it's
for
hard
this kind of thing?
DMT is pretty much very often, with variations, it is pretty much the same every time, or very similar, But, it goes so fast, and this stuff is presented so fast. It's this download of information into the brain. So you in some ways, I find the psilocybin experience or the ayahuasca experience, which is essentially very similar, I find them much more useful than DMT, because it's like you've slowed down the tape in a way to a point where you can comprehend it, and it's like, okay, I can deal with this. This is much more the rate at which I can sort of process this, I can interpret it. It's not like I'm being, thrown down this well of multicolored imagery and crazy stuff that just kind of, it doesn't have the roller coaster effect.
But and I guess the way to put this is that a lot of people talk about the entities within a DMT experience, and I know that Dr. Strassman has written in his book that it's not just the DMT types, it is also, he said there were humanoid looking people. There were things that really creeped me out on the way home listening to this on the iPod, which was mannequin-like beings and things like that. Now, on that side of things, does the mushroom present that kind of effect at all?
I mean, the thing is, you have to remember a couple of things. One is that, everybody's an individual, right? So everybody's experience is unique. Some people see those things. Other people don't see those things. Some people sometimes see those things and not other times. The other thing you have to remember is most of these things are interpretations that you make after the fact. I mean, that is something that I've noticed, particularly with DMT. You're scarcely down. You're scarcely back from the thing where before you reach a point where the mind is trying to make sense of this. You're utterly overwhelmed with what happens, and you're already constructing hypotheses, about what did I see? Were there entities? Were they machines? What were they saying? You're trying to put all this in a framework to make sense of it, because this is what we do. This is what the human mind does. It tries to make sense out of the world. So I think, people do come up with these similar interpretations, but, that's why it's so tricky, so hard to get a handle on this, because do they come up with similar interpretations because, that's just the way we're built, and everybody's got similar neural architecture, and when these experiences happen, everybody's going to interpret it in more or less in the same way? Or is it because there really is some objectivity to it? And is it really another dimension? I mean, I hesitate to use that word, but, you have to entertain that possibility. And the same is similar with ayahuasca and mushrooms. Same thing, although less. And because the experience is slower, there's not this scrambling effort to put it all together. But you see the same types of mythical themes, the same types of creatures come up. Again, this is where something like shamanism is very useful. If you look at the paintings, of Pablo Amaringo, who is a Peruvian ayahuasquero who paints his visions, if you look at those visions, every one of the entities in there that he paints, he didn't just dream these up. They have a place in the cosmology, of ayahuasca. I mean, they have names, they have roles. He can tell you what each one is, and and of course their interpretation is religious, or that kind of thing.
Does your emotional state going into this predict the type of outcome you're going to have? If you're scared, will you see something scary? If you're happy, will you see something happy?
Not necessarily, no. Going into it, smoking DMT, there is usually considerable trepidation. I mean, there is considerable fear. And, you'd be nuts if you didn't have a little fear, right? Knowing what was going to happen. But usually, almost always, that drops away immediately. That isn't even operating anymore. It's like, okay, I know I'm going to step over the cliff here, but once you've stepped over, it's like, okay, I'm in the hands of the gods or whatever, and I'm just, floating along, and I hope I land safely. So the fear goes away. With mushrooms, with ayahuasca, there can also be an element of fear. Sometimes the things you see are frightful, or ugly, or ought to be frightening, but are not. And that's the odd thing. I mean, they can be, as frightening as any horror movie, but you're sort of separated from them. I mean, it's like watching a movie in a way. I mean, it's like you can choose to be afraid, or you can choose to be, oh, okay, I'm looking at this, fine, what else you got,
Does their reaction to you change with whatever you give to them emotionally?
It does. Yeah, it does. It actually does. You can modulate the experience quite a bit. You can say, okay, I don't want to see all these monsters anymore. Show me something beautiful. And it'll like, okay, well, how about this? Right. And so there is a certain degree of, there's a certain degree of control over the thing.
So have you, do you see commonalities in the abduction literature and what you've experienced?
Well, yeah, I do. Strassman's written about this. a lot, and the people that he was working with, he was giving them DMT, he was giving them high doses, he was doing a dose escalation study, he was giving them, he was giving it to them intravenously, which is, about the most direct way you can give that drug, and things didn't really get interesting for those people. Well, they got interesting, but they didn't get into this alien abduction territory until they got to really pretty substantial doses, and then it began to manifest. And I have to admit, I have probably not taken high enough doses of DMT to really go to that place, but I certainly have had enough experiences like that with high doses of mushrooms, and it's a very similar kind of thing. And it's you just had to be there kind of thing. This is why you have to do this to really get what I'm talking about. You have to do it under these controlled circumstances, and you'll see what I mean. It's like they're very matter of fact about it. This is the odd thing. If you take high doses of mushrooms under these circumstances, it just pretty much manifests and says, we are, if not extraterrestrial, at least alien entities. We've had an evolutionary relationship with your species, ever since the beginning, and we know a lot, and we're basically controlling evolution, and we're controlling the emergence of intelligence on this planet, and and the world is not like you think it is, because I say jokingly about ayahuasca, but I mean it seriously. I often say, if I get one message from ayahuasca, it is, you monkeys only think you're running the show,
Yeah.
And it's very insistent about that. It's like, no, you're not running the show, and you don't know shit.
Why is it? Why is it that you would be able to, take a substance and have that kind of very clear message come to you, but if you're an abductee, there's all of this just complete terror and no concise message like that? Have abductees been included in these experiments?
No, that's a good question, and I think the answer is complex. I think, for one thing, when you take the drug, there's a degree of control. Something strange is going to happen. You expect something strange is going to happen. So you might be afraid, but you're also, in some sense, pumped up for it. You're ready for something strange to happen. And so when it starts to happen, you don't get too upset. Abductees, apparently, these things happen to more spontaneously. I know I would be quite alarmed, if it just started happening. I would wonder if I was losing my mind. I would wonder, being experienced with psychedelics, I would wonder, has somebody given me a psychedelic without me knowing, or is there something, even stranger than that going on? So I think part of it is the spontaneity of it. I think part of it, we don't know really. This is very slippery, to get your hands around or get your head around, because, we know that there are certain states, like temporal lobe epilepsy, for example. I don't know if you've gone into the literature or looked at that at all, have you?
Yeah, a little bit, peripherally, yeah.
Yeah, personally?
Personally, no.
Personally, no. Well, temporal lobe epilepsy is pretty interesting because temporal lobe epilepsy is not where it's a lesion in the temporal lobe of the brain. And the temporal lobe is a part of the brain that is involved with kind of your place, kind of orienting you in space and time and orienting you in terms of your relationship with the rest of the world and all that. And when people who have temporal lobe epilepsy have these spontaneous experiences, which you might call mystical experiences, or a better term is probably transpersonal experiences, where suddenly they feel, these feelings of oceanic oneness. They feel, in contact with everything. They have ecstatic experiences. They have revelations. They have, and there are certain, they have personality types, which seem to be a characteristic of the epileptic state. They're often preoccupied with metaphysical questions. They will think about philosophy and religion and all this, and they often write long screeds. They do hypergraphia. They have wild theories about how the world's put together, and they are compelled to put these things down. And they have, and they're prone to saying things like, suddenly it was all clear to me, or, the moment I've been waiting for all my life, has come, right? And they have these types of experiences. Now, I'm not, don't get me wrong, I am not trying to reduce this to illness, and I'm not trying to reduce it to like a brain thing necessarily, whether it's a brain damage or something. I'm not really trying to put it down. I'm just saying that, in the realm of phenomena that can be looked at, and probed scientifically, which repeatability is an important criterion in science. That's why the psychedelics are so interesting in this respect, because, they are molecular probes that enable us to look at these altered states, at these very peculiar states of mind, like alien abduction type states, under controlled circumstances. And so they're very valuable. It's very hard to, one of the problems with the whole study of the alien contact, alien abduction phenomenon is you can't set that experiment up. You just have to wait and hope that it happens, and hope that, you've got your wits about you when it happens, or the cameras are running, or whatever it is. But things like temporal lobe epilepsy and psychedelics, you can actually approach this stuff in an experimental way. You can set up an experiment, and then you can pull the trigger and see what happens. So I think that's very useful. Another thing, as long as I'm raving on these neuroscience issues, there's a lot of similarity between the DMT state, the so-called out-of-body state, and the near-death experience. And, Strassman talks about this. And there's a lot of similarities between those things and the alien abduction contact with, lights in the sky or disc-shaped objects. There's very little difference between approaching, a shining silver disc and approaching, a shining light-filled passageway, which is what happens, supposedly, when you have a near-death experience. And it very often happens with DMT. It's a very similar thing. And DMT is in the human brain. You've read Strassman's book, so you already know all this. It's in the human brain. You can make a case that at the moment of death, the human brain, the brain is probably flooded with a massive release of DMT, along with a lot of other things, but that this may be a reasonable simulation, if not, in fact, the near-death experience. It definitely comes close. And as people say who have experienced the near-death experience and return to talk about it, they don't feel afraid. They feel ecstasy. They feel only joy. As they move toward this singularity, this tunnel, this white light, whatever it is. They feel a great deal of joy and ecstasy, and that's what DMT is.
Well, that gets me to one question that I wanted to ask you about, which was separate manifestations outside of psychedelic states for you. And I know that in True Hallucinations, which I'm still reading, when you all were traveling, and I believe you had stopped at one place before you reached La Chorrera, which was kind of like the place where you met where everybody kind of unloaded their baggage to a certain point to lighten the load for the hike into the jungle. And Terrence wrote in there that you all had seen a light in a field that apparently was there, and you all were trying to kind of chase it around or get up to it. And then later on in the book, of course, Terrence talks about his UFO sighting, which was pretty profound in my opinion, because I've heard identical similarities to that I spoke to you about on the phone.
Right. Which was the typical, George Adamski,
right.
Completely, vacuum cleaner, hubcap,
exactly.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, like that self-contradictory thing.
So it was a joke, right? Yes. And that's the other thing about DMT, and especially about the mushrooms. Ayahuasca less so. Ayahuasca is more sort of stern, but the mushrooms are very mischievous, and very funny. It's like they're playing with you. It's like they have a great sense of humor, and they're very sort of elfin that way. And it's just the sort of thing you would expect them to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what do you say to that when you hear about and experience yourself things that are outside of a psychedelic state that are manifesting that look similar to what you see in a psychedelic? In other words, that bleed over. I mean, what are we really supposed to do with that? Because
what are we? Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what we're really supposed to do with it. I don't know. That's the thing. At the end of all this talking and speculation, I come around to saying, I don't know, what the hell is going on, and it's very sort of frustrating. I guess if we knew, we wouldn't have to talk about it. I'm not sure, but right. It's something about the way that that our brains the brain mind, synthesizes reality and puts it together. And I think maybe that's what it is. I don't believe for a minute that, the aliens come from, other star systems. I think there may well be aliens in the galaxy, and there may well be other, in other star systems, but the likelihood that they are here hanging around and carrying out, proctological examinations on people that they, sort of randomly abduct from lonely places, it strikes me as so unlikely. Doesn't it strike you that way?
It strikes me as more or less that whole human attribution of trying to put it in a box, and this is just the first thing that we thought of. And I don't know if I told you or not, but when Jeremy and I went to Washington, D.C. to take part in this basically like a disclosure conference of sorts. We usually go to kind of do our little interviews and talk to different people in the field, and at the end of this, Jeremy stood up in front of all of the panels were laid out and the whole crowd, and he said, I'm just curious, you all are laying out this big diplomacy pattern for what's going to happen when this is all disclosed, and you don't even really know that it's extraterrestrial, or do you? And what proof do you have that it is extraterrestrial? And I think that one of the most frustrating things about that was that one of the most senior members on that panel, a guy named Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who I have nothing but respect for and what he's done in this field, but he kind of almost irritated me with his answer. He says, well, when you're talking about extra dimensions, I don't really know where to go with that. And my answer is, okay, since we don't know where to go with it, that means we just go with the easy way and delude ourselves for that?
That means we just dismiss it? Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, when you don't know what the phenomenon is, I mean, this is, I think we touched on this a little bit in our previous conversation, about crop circles and things like that. I mean, crop circles are another example of, I mean, they are definitely an anomalous phenomenon. I do not believe that all crop circles are done by drunken Englishmen having a good time after they've left the pub. It just doesn't make sense. It's not, that's as crazy an explanation as anything. So here's a physical phenomenon, clearly of intelligent origin, and yet all the SETI people, totally dismiss this. I mean, they say, well, it's not a radio signal, so forget it. Right. I mean, this is the weird thing, the people, I mean, the phenomenon that puzzles me about this whole thing is that the people who are most deeply involved in this stuff on the public level, the SETI people, serious scientists looking for signals from outer space, and even the serious, supposedly serious UFO people have an almost embarrassing lack of imagination.
Right.
I mean, they have no vision at all. We're talking about other dimensions. Well, we can't be bothered with that. We have nothing to say. We don't, that's woo-woo stuff. And this is why it's very difficult when you bring up the subject of drugs.
Oh my God, yeah.
God, now it's like, oh, well, you're just, these crazy whacked out hippies, who have no, so you can't even talk about it, and yet here is a tool, a pharmacological tool, if you will, that that gives you the ability to look at a lot of this phenomenon experimentally, but they don't want to hear about it. I mean, they want it to be. I think on some level, I think they're afraid that it is something really, really, really strange, and they don't want to go there. They want it to be extraterrestrials. Okay, we can deal with that. Extraterrestrials who have technological capabilities, they build ships, they come here. It's all good, They're basically like us,
Right.
They're tinkerers and they move around in space and time. No, it ain't like that.
Yeah, well, we've had that conversation enough on this show. I mean, it's been, and we've covered the gambit before. I think Jeremy and I talking last night were saying that, it's there's a monetary value to sticking to your guns and defending your theory, and then there's the people who are so deep into that theory that they can't get out of it, because then they'll really be thought uncredible if they just abandon their theory that they've been married to for 35 years. And I'm always the one that, and Jeremy as well, we're the guys saying, why isn't Jacques Vallée, he's certainly a well-known figure, but why isn't his outlooks and his postulations on different avenues to look at, why didn't he get a better reception than he did?
Why didn't he get a better reception?
Exactly.
Well, yeah, because basically these people, they don't really want to understand it, and they're afraid. I think they're afraid, basically, that it doesn't fit into any paradigm that they can wrap their heads around. Right. And so people like you and Jeremy coming at it from one direction, and people like me coming at it from, this other direction. I mean, we're just completely dismissed, which is why I don't even bother anymore. I mean, how does it feel to be such a wacko that you're dismissed by the wacko?
the fringe of the fringe, as my friend Tim All said.
Yeah, the fringe of the fringe, right? Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So all right, whatever.
Well, I'm in pretty good company then. I mean, that's that's great.
But the thing is, they'll never understand.
What do the shaman say? Do they have a delineation between, do they believe in gods and aliens and whatever these plant intelligences are? Do they have separations like that, or is it all one thing to them? What do they say about all of this?
It's all pretty much one thing. I mean, to them, they're totally matter of fact about this whole thing. I mean, they live in this world, pretty much all the time. They take ayahuasca, but they're pretty much in this state all the time, and they're I guess what you'd call animists, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. I mean, they think everything's intelligent, everything has consciousness. Of course the plants are intelligent, of course the dolphins are intelligent, and so they live, in this magical world, which I think is a lot closer to, sort of the magical world that everyone lived in before, we had writing, we had print, we had this way of perceiving the world that, is so filtered through, sort of our assumptions and our vision and our Western education and all that. To the shamans, it's a very different world, and they're pretty much in touch with it all the time. I mean, just as an illustration, just as a trivial illustration, I'm an ethnobotanist. That's partly my day job, and I was researching Amazonian plants to treat schizophrenia. I had a grant to do that, so I hung out with a number of shamans. I got to know one pretty well, and I said, so, okay, what plants do you use to treat schizophrenia? And he said, well, we have two. He said, if the person is hearing voices, then we use this plant. And, and that perked up my ears because that's a nice Western symptom of schizophrenia. People hear voices, so okay, great, they use this plant. But if the person has been enchanted by the dolphins, then we use this plant. And I'm like, oh, okay. and he was just, that was to him, one was as real as the other. And they live in a different reality, and I think. And this really comes back to the way that, I mean, our brains, this conversation about drugs, is so stupid to my mind and so trivial, so sort of superficial because, I teach a course on drugs, culture, and society at the university, and I put a quote up from Salvador Dali, who said, I don't take drugs, I am drugs. And if you think about it, that's really true. We are made of drugs. Our brains are biochemical engines that are made of drugs. And that's why drugs work. That's why drugs from the outside world work. You can take them and they interact with these receptors, and these receptors are the co-evolutionary relationship of the fact that we've co-evolved with all these plant chemicals, and over the course of evolutionary time. And basically what I'm getting at is that, the brain, what we call reality, is really a hallucination. We are living inside a hallucination. And, what we call reality is a fiction or a myth that is constructed by our brain in order to enable us to navigate through the world and, in order for us to make sense of things and survive and not step in front of buses and things like that. I mean, it has a certain, correspondence with external reality, but the model of reality that our brains construct, it looks nothing like reality. I mean, the physicists tell us this. Our instruments tell us that reality looks very different. And it's electromagnetic waves and things like that, and process and qualities like color and smell and texture and beauty and all of these things. These are all supplied by the brain, by the human perception that takes in information through from the outside through this sensory neural interface, filters it, interprets it, mashes it together, synthesizes it all together, and creates the reality hallucination, and then you step into the reality hallucination, and that's where you live, that's where we all live. And we have a close enough correspondence between these different realities that we all live in that, there's definitely something objective there. We have we're sharing the hallucination to a certain degree, but, we can change the signal slightly. I mean, it's kind of like tuning a radio or something. You can tune another channel. You can take a drug and change the nature of this sensory neural interface. And things change, but it's still the same reality, only our model of it and our interpretation of it has changed.
What do you think about the possibility that, as a species, we, on the whole anyway, stepped out of magical thinking into this rational materialist mindset so that we could build ourselves up in that way and become more almost individuated as a species to then reincorporate ourselves back into that larger picture? Do you think that's the next step? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I think actually I do. I think that's very possible. I think that may be why we had to go through all this. In a way, we had to separate ourselves from the matrix. We had to, in fact, develop an ego, develop a point of view. We had to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. I mean, literally, that's what we had to do. That may be what these psychedelic plants are, on a mythological sense. They are, in a way, you've got your non-conscious, non-linguistic, non-technological primate, kind of living in the jungle, having a great old time, not thinking a whole lot, not thinking in a rational sense anyway. And then at some point, and in fact Terence has speculated on this, and I have as well, that, the chance encounter of, with some of these psychedelic plants might have been a triggering event that led to the emergence of consciousness. And maybe that's what these things are there for. I mean, this is what the mushrooms, but this is what the mushrooms will tell you, in the same way that, the shamans say, well, the plants told us, how to do this. If you take the mushrooms under these experiences, they'll pretty much present this as, this is what's happening. And it's like they're not presenting it they're not trying to convince you. They're not trying to say, try this idea out. It's like, hey, man, this is it. And you're like, what? Don't be ridiculous. But there it is.
Well, the more I hear you talk about this stuff, and I think I mentioned to you that I've kind of been riding this idea for quite a while, at least as it applies to to our interest in all this is that over the course of years and people that I've spoken with, it seems to be a constant as far as the experiencer syndrome that Jeremy and I are a part of, is that the more attention, the more focus or borderline obsession on the subject, and not just asking the simple questions, but asking the deeper personal questions, seems to make things manifest. And the more I'm hearing you talk, the more I'm kind of getting the idea that is it something that I've always said this has a lot more to do with us and our nature of perception than it does, as I said before, of little green men from Planet X. But
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, going from that, I'm wondering if I always kind of had the idea of windows or doors that somehow thought was opening up or intent was opening up to allow these things to manifest here. But I'm wondering if what's happening now is the focus of intent or thought changing our or possibly altering our perceptions in order to see what's already there that we just can't perceive of in a normal state, or what we define as normal, quote-unquote normal state, or whether that's just that slight shift in perception that is allowing these things to be seen, as opposed to,
I think that's very much true. I think that's very much true. It's a way of entraining ourselves, as you say, to see things that are always there, but that we don't normally see because of the nature of this sensory neural filter this hallucination. And the hallucination that we construct for ourselves is not simply based on our, on our neural architecture, our physiology, the way our brain is structured. It's also conditioned by culture and history and all of these things. Right. This is why, again, if you hang out with these shaman, you realize that, they live in a different world, and their reality is as valid as your reality is. And your reality, it's close enough that, you can walk down the trail with them and have a conversation and, all of that stuff. But what they are seeing when they walk through the jungle and what you see are two completely different things. They see so much that's going on, that you don't see. Right. And probably if you reverse that situation, if you took one of these guys and put them in the middle of Manhattan Island at rush hour, then you'd be the one that's more on top of what's going on, and they would be very confused, So I do agree. I think that that's a lot of what it is. I think that these are tools that enable us to learn different ways of perceiving. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's anything more to it than that.
I mean, certainly the thing that fascinates me about it is the whole similarity to, and not as a whole, but there are definite connective threads that I'm seeing between the experiences that we've had and psychedelic experiences. And I describe
other types of paranormal experiences.
Paranormal, exactly. Yeah, and
I was recollecting what you described to me the other night about your lost time experience and being at the Chesapeake Bay and then being like 6 hours away.
Right.
And just recollecting that, phenomena like that are described in shamanism all the time. There's a word for it, in fact, called bilocation. You've probably heard of that. It's being in two places at once. And, if you go into the literature on Siberian shamanism particularly, this comes up. It's something that they know how to do, or claim they do, and it's one of these things where, this stuff all just seems so improbable from the particular box that we inhabit most of the time, this rationalist reductionist box, it's so easy to dismiss all this.
Right.
And so, I mean, most of the time, I don't know if you're like me, but most of the time I do inhabit a rationalist reductionist box, but, I mean, because it seems like a good, sort of initial stance in some ways. Skepticism is always good.
Absolutely.
In a certain sense, approach it with skepticism, but also you have to keep an open mind. And that's, I think for me, that's what psychedelics have done. They've said, okay, you're welcome to your skepticism. Just remember, you don't know shit. Right?
Right. Yeah.
And so stay humble, and keep your mind open, because you might learn something.
Right. Well, there's a question out of your experiences at La Chorrera that I've got to ask, because it's pretty much dumbfounded me in the book, which was you walking through the jungle with no glasses on in the middle of the night to all of these different locations,
right.
that your brother described as being a shaman's walk. Am I saying that right? Or that kind of experience. So what, if you can, describe for us what the onset was and how that happened and what occurred to you that night.
Well, it's hard for me to describe it because my recollection is poor. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, I was in, I don't know what you call it, a trance, another place. I mean, I know from, descriptions of what happened and where I went and so on, and descriptions of classical shamanism, that's what it was. It was a shamanic journey, because that's what the shaman does. He goes on a journey. That's kind of the classic theme of the thing. He goes on a journey. He goes to the world tree, or he goes to an axis, and the axis mundi, the world tree, the axis of the world. And that is usually visualized as a tree, although in Siberian shamanism it's visualized as a mushroom. In ayahuasca shamanism it's sometimes visualized as an ayahuasca vine that stretches up to the sky and is a ladder because the leaves are arranged like a ladder. But there is some kind of an axis that unites the sky, this world, the middle world, and the underworld. And the shaman, if he does nothing else, he goes to this axis. This is the way he gets access to the upper realm and the lower realms, is by traveling up and down this axis. And that's what I did. I went wandering into the jungle. I found a tree. I climbed up into the tree, and then who knows?
Right, yeah.
I just launched off into it. I mean, I guess I just sat there for a while, but I was off on a shamanic journey. And, I mean, really shamanism is a good, a good thing to look into, because it's so similar in some ways to a lot of these phenomena.
I have no doubt that you've given both of us and our listeners a lot to read about. So we have homework to do.
Yeah, well, there's a the thing is, there is a whole literature around this. So it's not like, and it's outside the writing about UFOs and extraterrestrials, and yet, I think you can shed light on this. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and that we didn't discuss, but I'd like to ask your own experience. One of the things that I think is part of this whole mix is are some of these, in the abduction experiences, are some of these dream states, and particularly paralytic dream states. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Can you give me
What is a paralytic dream
example?
Well, when you're asleep,
lucid?
and not so much lucid. Well, maybe lucid too, but when you're asleep and you kind of know you're asleep, you can't really wake up and you can't really move. And you're unable to move, or it takes a great deal, and things are going on. I mean, I have had these states. I mean, the closest thing I've experienced to an abduction state outside of psychedelics is actually a state like this, where I feel like, you know, I'm on the bed, there are entities around me, not particularly threatening, though not particularly friendly, and I'm not able to respond. I'm not able to get up and leave. You know, I know I'm in the bed and I'm paralyzed, and this is known as well. I think, again, from other sources, like the experience of the incubus and the succubus in
Right. The old hag.
Yeah, the old hag, or the experience of having something sitting on your chest. You know, and I've often wondered, you know, how often do those experiences happen? You know, when you're in one of these paralytic dream states and the damn cat comes in and sits on your chest. I mean, I don't know about your cat, but
Right.
mine does it all the time.
Yeah.
If you're not awake, you know. So
I mean, I can't say as I personally had very much of that at all, really. I mean, there's been my childhood things. I think that was a small part of that, but there was so much more on top of that that I can't really ascribe that. I mean, what you're describing sounds a little bit like, again, what they refer to as sleep paralysis, and
yeah.
Mine had a really tiny point of that in it, but I can't say that that I've ever had that direct of a experience with sleep paralysis to know that.
So in these experiences of abduction, where you're in the bed and things are around you, you've had that, right? But it's not.
Most of mine have been while I'm awake, which is worse, I guess, in a way.
But how did you know you were awake?
Well, my wife was with me for one particular one that was shared. So I tend to think we were since we were driving. But
yeah. Okay.
but no. I'll say this if I haven't already for the show, because I really can't remember if I mentioned this or not. But it was actually it was right after our conversation on the phone. I went downstairs and I was telling my wife what an amazing conversation I had with Dr. McKenna, and we talked for about 2.5 hours, and then I called Jeremy and I was telling Jeremy about this, and again, going from that standpoint of the more attention that's paid to this, or more the focus that's going, and of course, conversations like this, which are so deep, and ultimately to me really meaningful, that seems to almost manifest something. So that night, I went to bed. I actually got a bowl of ice cream. I was sitting in my easy chair watching TV for about an hour, and then about 2 o'clock, I fell asleep in my chair. I woke up. I brushed my teeth. Changed my clothes, went upstairs, and I got into bed, and I was actually cracking open a book. About that time, I heard a loud or semi-loud, like I guess like a rotating hum sound, which was like woo, 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 coming from the opposite end of the house. And at first thought, I said, well, it's probably a helicopter, because I have heard them. We're in a Cape Cod house, so we get kind of a weird little acoustic thing going on with the peaked roof. And it got louder, and it didn't seem to be moving away from us. It seemed to be moving over top the house. To which at that point I kind of just laid there and began to think a lot of what I've read that your brother's written, a lot of what you and I talked about, a lot of what Jeremy and I have talked about my fear regarding this stuff. And I said, I might as well stop with that and just kind of pay attention. And so I laid there, and I could not believe how loud it got, but it wasn't a shrill sound, it was a very low sound, to the point where the pillow underneath my head, I could feel the percussion of the revolution of the hum in that pillow. So it was definitely something very deep to be able to pull a percussion off like that. And for a second I debated, should I reach over and try and wake up my wife Lisa, and she was laying beside me. But when I went to roll over, I noticed that the bottom half of my legs from the knee down didn't seem to want to work. So again, I just kind of ignored that and rolled over, and I said, it doesn't matter because she's not going to wake up anyway. Because that kind of thing seems to be rather common with my experiences, at least. And I was talking to Jeremy about this the next day after work, and it's very hard to explain this, and it's hard to actually know if I'm saying it right. But as perked as I was and as awake as I was, I have a real hard time trying to figure out how did I fall asleep during that. Because I remember that the short moments right before my eyes were shutting, there was obviously someone standing down towards the end of the bed, but on my side of the bed. And all I got in any kind of communication at all was either hold still or where does it hurt? And then there's nothing else until morning. Now, interestingly enough, I was talking about this with a friend of mine, and my 16-year-old is sitting in the chair, and he says, that woke me up. I heard that too. And he said, I had a heck of a time going back to sleep after that. And I said, well, was it that humming, that real, he's like, yeah, it was very loud. So again, I got to wonder, am I, by the talk and the focus of all this, is that what's facilitating some kind of manifestation of all of this? That's my big question.
I mean, so you heard this thing, you got up, you went to the other end of the house?
I got up and I got as far as my doorway.
Okay.
And I basically kind of twaddled back and got into bed and just laid there thinking, okay, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but as the seconds wore on, it was pretty obvious that this wasn't a helicopter, because after a while you start to hear the chop of the blades, and I didn't hear that.
Right,
it just continued with that same revolutioned hum.
So why did you go back to bed? Why didn't you continue on to investigate it?
I have no answer for that.
Question, right? That's the question.
Yeah. So,
well,
that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I told you on the phone, I have a great amount of fear regarding this stuff, and that I got to say, that was kind of a pretty good milestone for me to be able to lay there and just wait and watch.
Well, Dr. McKenna, did you notice, like, when you saw the light in the field, or when Terrence saw the Adamski light craft? Do you happen to remember? Were you guys talking about this type of stuff? Were you focused on it at the time when you saw it?
We were focused on it. Yeah, I was not when Terrence saw the Adamski craft. I was not there. I mean, I was there, but I was so out of it at that point. I was off in my own parallel universe. I mean, I never saw anything like that. So, in fact, he's the only one that saw that, which conveniently enough, right, there's no way to verify that he actually saw that. When we saw the light in the field, this idea of the light in the field was a theme that sort of started when we started taking mushrooms as we were moving down the Putumayo and then up this other river, and we were taking a lot of mushrooms, far more than probably we should have been. But this idea that, there was a light in the field, and it was a mushroom or it was something, we were very much talking about it, But of course, we were 3 sheets to the wind. I mean, we were loaded on mushrooms. So what can you say, But very much at La Chorrera, if you've read, you've read True Hallucinations, this theme that we were trying to follow these instructions that were being downloaded to us by this entity, whatever it was. We called it the teacher. That was as good as anything, I guess, to call it, that was trying to instruct us how to make this artifact out of, sound and DNA and mushrooms and all of this. And it was very much like an alchemical process. In fact, we were both at the time, and really still are, but at the time we were very much steeped in Jungian psychology. And Jung, wrote extensively about alchemy. And so, we understood a lot about the symbol of alchemy, and the alchemy is about, on the most superficial level, it's about transforming base metal into gold, right? That isn't really what it's about at all. It's about transforming, the psyche. It's into something different, and it uses the symbols of chemistry, the language of chemistry, and all this language about distillation and color changes and all that, to symbolize what is essentially a psychic process, a process of psychic transformation. And the making of the Philosopher's Stone, right? And the Philosopher's Stone is just another term for the flying saucer. Essentially, it was the early conception of the flying saucer, of this artifact that is the ultimate artifact that can do anything. And that's what we were trying to create. We were trying to create an artifact that essentially would do anything that you could imagine, because it would be the imagination in a certain sense. I mean, this is how whacked out we were. We actually took this stuff seriously and tried to make this thing. And, and when it didn't manifest the way that we predicted it would, what did happen was that, something had to give, right? Something was going to happen. So what happened was that we underwent this simultaneous psychosis, which could be called a psychosis, that lasted 14 days or longer, that, but could also be construed as a shamanic initiation, because all of the themes were there. The themes of, in shamanism, another thing that comes up again and again in shamanism the world over is that the shaman undergoes initiation, and that process involves being torn apart, literally torn to pieces, and put back together again in a way that is different, so that they are actually a transformed being. And like in certain traditions, like in Siberia and South America, sometimes in Australia, they have this idea that, they put, they incorporate crystals and things like this into the recreated body, of the shaman. So it's very much this death, resurrection, transformation theme. And that's what we thought we were doing. That was what we were trying to do. And that was kind of the conceptual framework in which we were doing all this stuff. And one of the themes, over the course of this psychosis stretched over a couple of weeks, and actually longer than that, actually the rest of our lives in some sense. But the idea was that, in alchemy, you've got to condense the stone, right? There comes a point where you have to condense it. There's a mercurial stage where it's liquid, it's like mercury, and you have to fix the mercury into the stone. It's the final stage before you get the philosopher's stone. And so a lot of what was going on at La Chirera was our attempts to predict when this stone was going to condense and when we were going to essentially call it in, call it in from outside, like calling a flying saucer in, or calling, visions in from outside, as shamans will do in ayahuasca. It's very common that, they will go out, they will go to the edge of the clearing, smoke some mapacho, sing an icaro, and bring the visions literally in, from outside, and suddenly everything is engulfed. And this is what we were trying to do. And the time wave and all these cycles that Terence was fiddling with, that was obsessively fiddling with after a while, were really attempts to predict when was this stone going to condense? When was this philosopher's stone going to condense? And when we did it at La Chirera, we thought, well, it would condense in a few days, and then it became a few weeks, and then it became a few years, and then finally, he predicted, okay, well, actually, based on time wave zero, which is a whole other thing we could talk about, it's going to happen in 2012. and about that, right, about time wave zero and all that stuff.
I don't think I do. I know various theories on 2012, and maybe it'll sound familiar if you start to explain it.
Well, he's one of the meme creators about 2012. It's not only the Mayan calendar, although conveniently enough, the Mayan calendar also ends in 2012. But he talks about it in True Hallucinations. But if you want to learn more about it, you can read The Invisible Landscape, which is the first book we wrote on this whole thing. And The Invisible Landscape, presented itself as as essentially as nonfiction, as an attempt for our attempt to make sense out of all this crazy stuff. And it's heavy sledding, but it's quite interesting. And among the things he talks about or that we talk about together in The Invisible Landscape, is this time wave that he constructed, this mathematical object based on the I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese oracle. And if out of La Chirera and all of these things, if there was actually an alien artifact that was created, this was it, probably. It turns out to be a mathematical idea about the structure of time, and how time is structured, and how you could actually predict the end of time. If you could analyze this mathematical wave in the right way. Now, I have to say, in the years since, I've become very skeptical of the time wave idea. I mean, I think it's a very interesting idea, but I think
Although he came to 2012 separately from the Maya?
Yes, actually he did.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I do remember this. Nancy Burns at UFO Magazine wanted me to read all about it for a writing assignment, actually. So I guess this is the signal that I need to do that.
Right.
Yeah, well, the Invisible Landscape is the book, and now there's plenty of other writing about it. Everybody and their dog has weighed in on this. So there's lots out there. If you just Google Time Wave Zero, all sorts of stuff will come up.
Well, I think we're going to add the Invisible Landscape to the Paratopia book club, and So can we convince you to come back in some months coming and talk some more with us? Because we're out of time.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah,
you know?
Great.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a very nice conversation. It's not every day you get to talk with people that are as crazy as you are.
That's right. Well, there you go. There it is. But seriously, Dennis, we want to thank you so very much for coming on and taking time out to talk with us this evening, and it's been awesome as usual.
I'm happy to do it. I hope you can get something coherent out of this.
Thank you, sir.
It's been a pleasure, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
So, Jeff, was that your little dream come true interview? Was that everything that you had hoped and wished for?
Yeah, but we still got a long way to go with that. I think we've got probably a lot more to talk to him about, and a lot more to explore, and I think we got to do it. I think we actually got to do it. And you've said that to me before, that there's really only one way to understand exactly what he's talking about, because some of it is apparently indescribable.
And I'm still skeptical that it's the same thing being tapped. It very well may be, or it may be kissing cousins of the same thing. But yeah, there's really only one way to know, and that's to do it.
Yeah, I guess we're exactly. So if you audience members would like to hear me and Jeremy take a trip on mushrooms live on the show, send your emails to
nothing like handling this with the utmost degree of caution and and sincerity.
No, I don't. That was a joke, folks. I don't think we'll be doing that.
But we will.
I do. But I don't think we'll be doing it on the air.
If I do it, I will record as I go. I mean, if it's true that that you retain your sense of self and have your wits about you, then I see no reason to not be like, Stardate 664, Captain's Log, or whatever, and just go along until the mushroom men kill me.
Well, maybe one of the board members or listeners can chime in on it, but I've got a friend of mine who has pretty significant experience with the mushroom, although he admits that he's not taken the right dose to get the voice or the presence or whatever you want to call it that both the McKenna brothers talk about. And Terrence made it pretty clear that if you don't get certain effects with DMT or with the mushroom, you just didn't take enough. These guys weren't fooling around with piddly doses. These were high doses, just like Strassman's DMT thing apparently were pretty high doses to achieve that breakthrough experience. But a friend of mine said it is kind of weird because it's not constant, and maybe somebody on the board or a listener can confirm this for me, but he claims that it comes sort of in waves, that you start out, you can feel it coming on. Now, I don't know what that coming on feeling must feel like, but apparently that's when, a shadow on the wall can start flapping like a bird, and you're okay with it. You know what it is. You know it's the mushroom doing this. And that's what he saw was, he was in the bathroom taking a leak, and he looked up on the wall, and there was a shadow from some towels hanging. And apparently that shadow began to move. It began to wave like a bird. But he said that kind of comes and goes for a while, but it gets more pronounced every time you do it until you peak, he says, and then it starts to go down the other side of the mountain where the effects are less and less noticeable each wave that comes up. So, I was pretty amazed to hear Dennis say that you can sit in your room and somebody rings the door like dominoes, Oh, let me get that. Hold on a minute. And get up and answer the door, and nobody's the wiser. I'm sure at some point you really don't want to move or don't get up or something like that. But when I mentioned that to a friend of mine that who like I said has had these experiences with this. He said, well, there is a point where you kind of almost got to keep yourself occupied or pay particular attention to the person you're talking to if you're in that kind of situation, because your mind is easily distracted into, like, if there's a picture on the wall, you'll start kind of like, oh yeah, look at that, And meanwhile, the guy's talking to you about, well, sir, that's $11.95. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, $11.95, right? Huh. Okay. Oh, what was it again? So I think that would actually make me feel a little better, knowing that you get kind of a breather during all of that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, my feeling on this is he's saying there's a difference between ayahuasca, DMT, mushrooms. I know there's a difference between normal wake state, meditative whatever state, thing opens in my spine, meditative state, alien abduction type scenario, lucid dream scenario, regular dream scenario. I mean, so I have, given all that, I have no reason to really think that these are going to be mirror images of, where your head's at during an abduction. However, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be opening something real or giving you access to other dimensions, let's say, for a better term. But so I really want to find that out. And if it is something else, I mean, if I have the wits about me, I'd like to ask whatever this magical intelligence is.
Right.
All about it, all about alien abductions. Do you know anything about it?
Let me tell you what I think you'll hear when you ask that.
Go ahead.
You don't know shit, Jeremy. That's
right. Which is why I'm asking, asshole. Will be my reply, and then I won't have a heart attack mysteriously.
Right.
You'll wonder what happened.
Let me ask you this. What do you think, being as you have the whole energy thing going on, what do you think its reaction might be to that?
I don't think anything unless I took the drug or the mushroom or whatever and then went into that state. I mean, that would be something that I would try to do, would be to, immediately enter that and see what happens, But I don't know.
Have you, I mean, you don't drink at all, right?
No.
So really the only, you've never had the altered state of consciousness from any sort of
No, the most was when I was in the hospital with a bad back and they put me on morphine.
And did it react to that at all?
No, I mean, it doesn't seem to react really to anything. I mean, I didn't go into any sort of meditation stuff while I was in the hospital.
Okay.
I was just on morphine, and that was great.
So it doesn't necessarily. so it doesn't necessarily do anything outside of a meditative state. You can't feel anything as reactionary to any stimulus outside of something.
No, and sometimes it tries to trigger itself, or sometimes it does. I'll wake up moving around and realize, oh, I'm asleep and this thing is working. Or I'll just be sitting around, whatever, hanging out at a friend's place or something, and my hand will start moving, or my head or something, or standing waiting for the subway, and it'll start trying to walk me somewhere, that kind of thing.
Oh, you're one of those people.
I should call cuckoo for Cocoa Puff.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very heady experience, but, like I said, I see a lot of really odd, similar things about it. Now, that doesn't mean that that's absolutely what it is, but it could be a puzzle piece to it. I wonder if I wonder if the kind of like what I was saying in the interview, which is it's given me a new perspective kind of on the more you give, the more you get thing that I've been thinking about for a long time.
Right.
And I do have to wonder if it's more along the lines of our thought is altering our perceptions at the time to be able to see things that are already there. and manifestation comes next. See, that's the part that I'm having the problem with is, yeah, you're seeing these things in the psychedelic state, but why are they manifesting outside of that? You know, I mean, Terrence had his UFO sighting, and he says in his lecture, "I wasn't loaded. I was up all night. I was insomniac." And you know, he mentions that to his benefit, you know, somebody would say, "Well, you were loaded on mushrooms, so who knows if you saw that or not?" But he said the good part in his favor is that he is aware by direct experience of every known hallucinogen, and he knows what those effects are because he's experienced them firsthand, and this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. So, you know, but he said, real, who is to say?
Would you be disappointed if it turned out to only be superficially the same, but actually not exactly what your abductions are, or, you know, whatever word you want to use, experience?
Well, I'm hoping that it isn't. I'm hoping that if it is the same intelligence, and I can discern that, and I hope that if I can't discern that, that's what I'll be disappointed in. If it's still as ambiguous as this stuff is, that's when I would go, man, you know, all that work of getting the courage up to actually do this, that's you know, that would be disappointing. If I could say, yeah, I think that's definitely who they are, this is what it is, but it didn't act the same, it acted differently, then I would say, well, how much of that is the drug giving me, you know, mushroom balls to, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. To be able to handle it better. How much of that is that I'm just in an altered state with it, and I'm more comfortable in that I brought this on. This is not something that walked into my room and shocked me. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, that would be okay. I'd be okay with that. But if I do get to have this conversation, as Dr. McKenna talks about, with another, you know, I'm going to ask, what was the white square? Was that this? Was that, are you the intelligence that I've been seeing all my life? Are you part of this? And see what its answer is. Now, by the same token, can you believe it? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't believe a lot of what the people in these experiences have told me. Mm-hmm. I don't believe, you know, a lot of the things that they've said. Long time ago, I used to have a saying, you know, never trust an alien. But I don't know. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for in it. I know that there are many, many things that that are very similar that really couldn't be known unless you had a quote-unquote alien experience. So how are these people experiencing the same thing? Is it some kind of mechanism that's triggering something in everyone that everyone has? And if that's the case, then that's still pretty interesting to me. I mean, I've always said that, you know, hey, if this is all in our heads, which I have very grave doubts that it's all in our heads. I mean, again, multiple witnesses and people with you during experiences, so it's clearly not that. But years ago, I used to say, even if this is something that is all in our heads, if everybody's having the same experience, that is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. And in DMT, it's repeatable. So, you know, that's another famous McKenna quote. You know, what we drug people that you UFO people don't have is repeatability. And a lot of people report the white room with the DMT beings singing these things into existence, the babbly language. And, you know, I mean, how would Reagan Lee, you know, have seen and experienced the personality of these small fuzzy beings around her bed chatting at her in this gibberish, and she felt them to be friendly but wouldn't turn her back on them? That's exactly what people are saying who've experienced a lot of DMT and have been to that place so many times that they build up a familiarity to it. Mm-hmm. They say the same things. They're like friendly, but they're almost like the one account that I read was a woman compared them to stall market people in India, where you say, no, I'm not going to buy that, it's too expensive, and they'll literally walk down the aisle behind you, wow, 5 cents, 3 cents, 2 cents, and you think, how is this guy could potentially, this isn't a little scary. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of the used car salesman attitude that these things have, and they can also apparently be very insistent. Terrence relates that as he went back time after time and became more and more familiar, that the objects that they were singing into existence became more and more complex. And they were saying to him, do it, do it, do it. And he would say, I don't know if I, that's pretty, well, do it, do it. He got really insistent. So there's that weird offsetness of, they're nice and friendly, but I still wouldn't turn my back on them.
But don't feed them after midnight.
That's right. Don't feed them after midnight. So it's all that kind of stuff, and it's the way the voice is related. When I had the conversation with Dennis on the phone, I mean, the way he was talking and just the demeanor of the voice and the personality and all of that was like, you're talking like my aliens. I mean, that's what they talk like. Their sardonic humor, their you really don't know what's going on, do you? And then when you postulate something at them, it's, are you sure? That kind of, it's just weird. I mean, that's what's got me really intrigued with this stuff. And ordinarily I'd be the first guy to say, well, you're on drugs. But the more you read, and the more you see the medical studies on this stuff, it's like there's something there. I just can't figure out exactly how it fits. How does it then manifest from a psychedelic experience into something that 4 people in a row can see?
Yeah, and there are also obvious, talking about the shaman who they're torn apart, and these beings place crystals inside of them and all that. I mean, if that's not your average abduction where they are implanted with something, I don't know what is. So there's stuff like that that is clearly, obviously similar, and and also shit, I lost my train of thought. The other thing.
I mean, I look at it from like the real obvious stuff, like a round white room. What? Softened lighting? What? I mean, it's just, that's just weird. And when you think about how bizarre that experience is and how bizarre the alien abduction scenario is, not the one that is sold to the public, but the one that we've talked about for episodes now on this show, you've got that bizarre nature. Now, of course, you're going to say, well, yeah, it's a psychedelic experience. It's going to be bizarre. But, when you start seeing things in it that are so damn similar, right, it doesn't make sense not to study it and try and look into it further, because what have we always said about this stuff? That the answer is probably far weirder and more ridiculous than we can possibly ever conceive of. So this would be pretty weird that a plant, can not only open your perception to see things that you can't normally see, and perception again is something we still don't know everything about. We don't know what it is. So how can we say that somebody seeing a hallucination is really hallucinating? We have to define what that means. But you've also got I don't know, the whole aspect of now I lost my train of thought. See what you do?
Sorry.
No. I think the other thing that that I can't remember. Did I eat a mushroom on this episode?
I don't know.
It's got me really.
I still can't remember what the other thing was I was thinking of. I don't know.
See how this works, and that's, but it's the whole idea to me that these shaman have to have an MAO inhibitor to make their plant work. And what the hell do they know about that? I mean, trial and error, why? I mean, unless you're just eating one day because you're starving to death and you eat a couple of plants and this happens, and then you say, well, it must have been that mushroom, and then you eat the mushroom and that doesn't work, and then you eat them both and you figure, oh, well, that must be it. Unless it was a stumble upon, which do you know how ridiculously against the odds that would be?
Well, the ayahuasca is not the mushroom. I mean, what could have happened is they eat a magic mushroom. The mushroom people are like, hey, you know what? You want to visit somewhere else?
Right.
Go make this ayahuasca. Here's how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, the plant's
told them
what to do. I mean, so, I mean, at that point, you got to wonder, and you know what kind of, when you hear stuff like that, there was something I wanted to bring up in the show that I forgot about, and that was a woman that I met really early on in actually getting actively involved in studying people's cases and interviewing people and doing investigations here and there. I met this was probably the third or fourth person that I ever spoke to who had an alien experience. And she had many, and I was just looking for someone to talk to about the experience. And I met this guy at a UFO conference in D.C., and he said, yeah, you really should, here's this woman's number. Give her a call. She's super nice. She's super open. And she's very coherent, literate, really smart girl. I said, okay. So I went and met her. She was probably 50 when I met her. And her name was Laurie. And when I met her, she told me, equal to the bizarre and nature of the experiences that I've had, she was relating back to me. And I'm like, yes, that's it. What is this? And she said that the beings told her that they were spirits of the trees. And I was like, spirits of trees? And she says, they told me they were spirits of trees. Which is weird because it's kind of, I don't know, kind of tandem to, the mushroom told us. Right. These I kind of perked my ears up with that. And I'm like, that's a little similar to that. So you've got these really weird connective things, and I'm not, all I can say is that's it as far as a direction for me right now to study. I think I've been more enthused over this than anything that's come up in recent years. Mm-hmm. And of about the past 10, I've been fairly burned out on theories. I've leaned more towards the, I guess, the dimensional aspect of it more so than anything else. I think the ETH is ridiculous, but I didn't know really where to go to study something like a dimensional or a perceptual angle of it. And maybe this is a possibility of a direction.
You finish your book, we'll do the shrooms, and we'll reconvene. We'll do a panel discussion with a whole bunch of surprise guests. Surprises to not just our listeners, but to us as well. Because we don't know who would be on that panel. But,
Well, I could...
like McKenna, and if we can get Strieber and whoever else, have a little powwow.
I mean, I think the biggest thing that I can say about trying it is that we have to find out what is the dosage. We don't want to piddle around. I mean, one pop and done. And if that's the case, I want to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, because otherwise, I don't want to be one of those people who says, oh, that's not right, and then have somebody tell me, well, you didn't take enough, and then I got to do it again. Unless I like it.
Well, we've certainly got the means. We know the people who would know the answer to that. So
sure.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Well, Jeff, I'm really proud of you because this is our second real podcast for Paratopia, and it's the first one where you haven't pressed any buttons with any stupid sound effects, quote unquote, by accident.
You mean like this one?